Hey gamers, starting after this intro, take a shot every time I say the word Grimdark. I'll even keep a helpful counter on the top right of the screen. All I ask is that you don't sue me for your liver failure. Grimdark, that good shit everyone who's into Warhammer likes, and I'd hope so too, since the term came from the 40k setting. But let me ask you something, is there such a thing as too much Grimdark? Can we get too far, or is there never enough? Can there be too little? Well, before I get more into these questions that I've just asked, I should start with an analysis of the term and its origins and meanings, and nah, I'm just fucking with you. You know what it is, don't lie. Shit sucks and it's only gonna get suckier. A heroic sacrifice by an Imperial Guardsman doesn't save the day and finally end the villain's reign of terror. It just means some of his former friends go, ah man, sure was cool of Steve to give us another half hour of life before we bite it too, and then a commissar brains them for cowardice.
If you will not have it.
Everyone's miserable, everyone's gonna die, everyone's hopes and dreams will amount to nothing in the foreseeable future. And given that there's a shit ton of people who can see the future in the Warhammer settings, that's a long time of Grimdark. But, like anything, there's a balance you need to maintain between too much and too little. Before I go further, let me just say that a setting losing its grim darkness isn't inherently bad. Like Age of Sigmar and to a lesser extent fantasy, having the idea of actually defeating chaos is definitely straying away from Grimdark, but it's by no means bad for those settings to do that. So with that being said, let's talk about how you can tell if your setting doesn't have enough Grimdark in it. Well, the short answer is you don't have enough Grimdark when things start to look up. There's more to it, of course, but as a good rule of thumb, Grimdark settings are supposed to be utterly hopeless and filled with despair. You can't see anything good on the horizon that will make things better for everyone. There's no magic fix-everything lever, and the best you can usually hope for is keep things as awful as they are now. That's not to say there's never any positive moments, but they're either small in scale and don't ultimately affect the larger universe, or they get undone not long after they occur. And above all, there's not a grand sense of adventure. Take Skyrim. Yeah, it probably sucks to live in it, and you're constantly fighting off horrifying monstrosities of all varieties, but it's got this feel of going on a grand journey to it as you travel across the lands, slay dragons, and meet new companions to travel with you on your quest. There's danger, but it's not oppressive, at least until you mod it to hell and back, then God only knows what you're in for. Back in Warhammer, the poster boy for Grimdark, almost no one's having any fun and glorious adventures. Even Gotrek and Felix, probably the most fun and lighthearted Warhammer gets, ignoring the children's books that exist for some fucking reason, have commented on how each time chaos advances in the old world, it gains a little bit more ground that is never retaken. Age of Sigmar has most of reality getting railed by chaos as its backstory, like at least 11, maybe even 10% of it. I just counted fucking backwards, goddamn. And 40k is just the worst place to live ever, because the only people with good motivations are the Tau and Eldar, and by God, the methods they get to those goals are just awful. Speaking of the Tau, however, in their original form, they were a good example of things getting too bright and noble. They were the good guys who just want everyone to get along and live together in peace and harmony, and if only everyone could just sit down and talk about their feelings, we could work all this conflict out peacefully. Pussies. Their faction had this feeling of things being actually hopeful and coming together for them in permanent and beneficial ways. These kinds of things can sometimes work for Grimdark settings, but things better be fucking awful before they get there, and they weren't for the Tau. Everything was going great. Nowadays, they're where they should be. The leaders use mind control to keep the populace in line, a caste system dictates their lives, and the greater good is definitely more beneficial to actual Tau than to their allies. Still much nicer than everyone else, but throw them in Star Wars or something and you've got a whole faction of villains right there for you. Smaller scale stories, meanwhile, have more leeway in what's considered too little Grimdark because they don't affect the larger setting as much. Caiaphas Cain is a fun adventure novel series that gets away with it because a system over from where he's on another bizarre adventure. Some dude's kids are getting grounded in a mulch because a space marine thought it would be quicker to run through them than around them. Gotrek and Felix are fine because when they're not around to turn the bad factions into ground beef, the Empire citizens are probably being eaten by Skaven. Overall, here's what I think. If you've got more than zero hope on the horizon, and that hope isn't qualified to hell and back with reasons why it actually sucks, you're losing your Grimdark. If things suck but it feels like an adventure, you're losing your Grimdark. If you want to keep things remaining Grimdark, you need a constant level of misery and hopelessness that even if you give it your all, it'll still amount to nothing. Not everyone needs to be an asshole, but even the most heroic heroes of heroism should be aware that they're fighting a losing battle. Now, how about too much Grimdark? Depends. Are you making a parody setting like 40k was at first? Then there's basically no limit. Your citizens should have 3 career options: join the military, produce weapons for the military, or be turned into food for the military. Tax rate should be 90% on a charitable planet. The only reason you don't rape and pillage the town next door is because you're on your way to rape and pillage another town with more people to submit to your worldwide human trafficking ring run by 4 different Satans. Go fucking nuts. If it's in the name of fun and being totally over the top, then it doesn't matter if it's total nonsense. You don't need to give a valid reason for things being this this way. The reason should be it's grim and dark because it's funny and awesome that way. Quit complaining and ruining the fun, you asshole. But what if you still want things to be dark, but in a setting that people can take kinda seriously? Well, then things have to be... I don't want to say dialed back, but they definitely need to be contextualized, if nothing else. Example, the Dark Eldar are a race of serial murder rapists at their kindest. Literally everything they do is evil. They probably don't even eat unless their utensils are made out of the bones of puppies and orphans and orphan puppies, but they're like that because their souls are always being eaten away and they can only stave it off by causing suffering. Is that incredibly, unbelievably edgy? Yes. Yes it is. But there's a reason for it. We know that if they don't do that awful shit, they're gonna get sent to hell forever. Yeah, the sick fucks enjoy it as well, but it's mostly because without being the worst, they just die. That's why you have the right amount of Grimdark. Would it make sense in the setting for it to be that way? Obviously, if it was real life, no one would ever be like the Dark Eldar, but this isn't real life. You gotta suspend your disbelief at some point, you know? There's two ways I find you have too much Grimdark and it just starts being too much. One is when there's no reason for it, like I said a minute ago. Like, say in fantasy, it was never explained witch hunters kill people due to fear of chaos and other corruption. Be kinda silly, they're just going around stabbing people in the throat. A grimdark thing in a setting that's trying to be serious can't just exist because it's needed for the setting to be grim and dark. Without that reasoning, it's just kinda there, which is fine in a parody setting when we're just having some dumb fun, but not if you're trying to make me root for someone to any kind of extent. The second way to have too much grimdark is when your reasons for it are stupid. I'm gonna complain about some obscure nothing piece of lore for way longer than necessary now, so here's the timestamp. You don't feel like listening to that. Now, of course, what I consider stupid and what someone else is gonna consider stupid are surely gonna be different. But you know that old piece of lore where Imperial ships don't have any kind of system to load their artillery, not even pulleys? And it said they have crew members numbering in the thousands manually loading the shells into place? Those shells that are the size of apartment complexes inside of ships the size of Rhode Island? That's a fun bit of lore. You know what it isn't, though? Any kind of reasonable. If you think about it at any kind of serious level, it just doesn't make any sense. In a parody setting, yeah, go nuts, that's amazing to have, but when you're trying to make me consider the universe in a semi-serious manner even, then yeah, this is a bit too much. I'm gonna make a bunch of strawman arguments in an overly condescending manner now, so here's the timestamp again. Anyways, alright, but the Mechanicus and Imperium say technology is sacred and don't fuck with it. Yeah, advanced insane Dark Age tech that can melt suns, not a hydraulic press. Fuck, just get a bunch of rope for a big pulley and you could have the people required for the system. But the Imperium might not have the resources required to make the system, but they can afford a battleship half the size of a continent and all the weapons for it, no problem. But human life is just that cheap in the Imperium. Yeah, but those thousands of lives would be better spent in the Imperial Guard or a Forge World somewhere, right? Is that all my strawmen? Wait, I think I have one more. Warhammer is in a serious setting. Look at these posters from early Warhammer and more recent Warhammer and say that again. The setting is getting less overtly parodic as time goes on. Yeah, of course it's still over the top as all hell, but it's been giving more reasoning for why everything is the way it is, and characters we're supposed to be rooting for usually don't paint their armor with civilians anymore. Chaos still does it, sure, but they're blatantly villains. They're not supposed to be the good guys at all, and the people that are the good guys usually aren't mentioned to be doing that anymore. Between Age of Sigmar and recent 40k content, the settings have slowly been becoming more serious, with a few exceptions, like the Orcs of course, and because of that, the grim darkness of factions like the Imperium, Empire, and Sigmarines have been characterized more in different lights. They're often portrayed as deeply, deeply flawed, and oftentimes cruel and evil civilizations and armies, but ultimately they do what they do because they must. Blowing up a planet is grim and dark, but knowing what we do about chaos, we accept it's necessary and oftentimes the smart thing to do, if still a horrid atrocity. Having tens of thousands of slaves manually push massive artillery shells into place isn't a necessary evil, it's just silly. If you disagree with me, I'll ban you from my channel. Can I do that? Yeah, so basically you better agree with me or I'm gonna block you and cry myself to sleep. Alright, I'm out of strawmen and I've been talking about artillery cannons and how they're loaded for far too long. Time to wrap this up. Grimdark can be, I've said this word too many times now, the trope of shit being fucked is something that I love, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't like Warhammer if I didn't, but depending on how the setting goes, it needs to be used carefully and in appropriate amounts. Too little and the setting can lose its charm. Too much and it just starts to get silly. Find the ideal balance and you'll be golden. Or just be a cornate and not care because you're too busy huffing permanent marker and eating paint chips. Let me know what you think. I would really enjoy to hear other people's takes on what the right amount is. Thanks for watching. Take care out there. Except I'm not done yet. Those god-awful cannon loaders are so fucking dumb. Yeah, one of these fucking ships can be loaded by a bunch of malnourished and disease-ridden scum who don't know what a sun is. Fuck you. It wouldn't work. It's bullshit. It doesn't make sense.